I still remember exactly how ordinary that afternoon was supposed to be when her message popped up on my phone. I was in the kitchen, half distracted by a boiling pot and a pile of dishes, when I saw her name on the screen. His ex. For a second, I honestly thought it had to be some kind of spam or mistake. But no. She was asking if I had time to meet her for a quick bite, saying it was important and that she meant no harm. My stomach dropped so fast it felt like I'd missed a step on the stairs. I just stood there, phone in hand, wondering why on earth the woman he always painted as a problem suddenly wanted to have lunch with me. The first thing that came to my mind was everything he'd ever told me about her. He used to say she was dramatic, that she never got over him, that she twisted stories to get attention. He told me she'd tried to sabotage his old relationships, that she was the reason he hated messy women. And I believed him, of course I did. I remember him rolling his eyes and saying he regretted ever dating her, that she'd turned into this bitter ex who couldn't let go. So when I read that invitation, all those labels echoed in my head. Obsessed, unstable, jealous. A part of me actually wondered if she wanted to pick a fight, or throw some old insecurity in my face, just because I was the wife now and she wasn't. But then there was this other part of me, the part that doesn't like shadows in the corner of the room, that hates unanswered questions. My hands were cold and a little sweaty as I typed back, agreeing to meet. I told myself I was just going to be polite, clear the air, prove to myself that there was nothing to fear. On the way there, I could barely taste the mint of the gum I was chewing. My mind was racing, replaying every time he'd dismissed her as crazy. When I finally pushed open the door of the cafe, the smell of coffee and warm pastries wrapped around me, but it didn't calm me down. I saw her sitting at a corner table, back straight, fingers tight around a cup, and in that moment, with her eyes lifting to meet mine, I knew this wasn't going to be a casual little chat. She stood up slightly when I approached, offering an awkward half-smile that didn't reach her eyes. I could tell right away she wasn't there to stir drama. She looked nervous, almost guilty. That alone threw me off balance, because it didn't match anything he'd ever told me about her. I sat down, my legs a little shaky, and I remember the chair scraping against the floor louder than it should have. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The cafe was buzzing softly around us, cups clinking, a milk steamer hissing, someone laughing in the distance. Meanwhile, my heartbeat felt like a drum inside my ears. She finally cleared her throat and said she was glad I came. Her voice was soft, almost apologetic, and that apology, that tone, made my chest tighten with dread. I tried to smile back, tried to act composed, but my mind was looping through every possibility of what she might say. Maybe she needed closure? Maybe she wanted to warn me about something unrelated. Maybe, God forbid, she wanted him back and thought confronting me was the way to go. Those were the kinds of messy, irrational fears that come up when silence drags out too long. She kept glancing down at her phone, twisting a napkin between her fingers. And then, out of nowhere, she said she didn't want to make things uncomfortable, that she wasn't there to argue or rehash anything from the past. She said she reached out to me because she believed I deserved to know something. Those words alone sent a chill crawling up my spine. My mouth felt dry when I asked her what she meant. I barely managed to get the words out without my voice cracking. She hesitated again, chewing on her lip, the way someone does when they're about to break bad news. And then she said it, almost in a whisper, that he had been messaging her. Not just a, "Hey, how are you?" or some nostalgic catch-up. He'd been telling her he missed her, that he wanted to see her, that things between us weren't working. She said he even wrote that he was single again. For a moment, I just blinked at her, like the words were in a language I didn't understand. My body froze, but my mind splintered into panic. It felt like the room tilted slightly, like gravity shifted under my feet. And still, she kept talking, gently, carefully, as if she knew she'd just cracked my world open and was trying to soften the blow that couldn't possibly be softened. I don't even remember how long I sat there staring at her, trying to piece together sounds, thoughts, anything that made sense. The cafe noises around me faded into this dull hum like I was underwater. I finally managed to ask her if she was absolutely sure, if she was positive those messages were recent. She nodded and turned her phone toward me. And there they were. His words. His name. His stupid little gray bubble saying he missed her laugh, saying he regretted losing her, saying he felt alive talking to her again. It was like someone had taken the floor out from under me. My hands started shaking so badly I had to set my coffee cup down before I dropped it. I remember thinking, absurdly, that I should have ordered tea instead. Something lighter, something that didn't suddenly feel like a stone in my stomach. She told me she debated for days whether she should contact me. She said she didn't want to be that woman again, the one blamed for chaos, the one accused of stirring trouble. She admitted she expected me to hate her, but when he started insisting they meet up, when he claimed he was single, that's when she decided enough was enough. Hearing her voice crack slightly as she explained all that, it broke something in me and mended something else at the same time. She wasn't my enemy. She'd been a victim of his lies once, and he was trying to make her one again. And suddenly it made sense. The late-night work calls, the random errands, the sudden defensiveness over his phone. All those little things I brushed off because I trusted him. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling for a moment, just trying not to fall apart right there. She reached across the table, a small, hesitant gesture, and placed her hand near mine, not touching, but close enough that I could feel the warmth, a silent offer of support, of solidarity. She said she knew what I must be feeling and that she wasn't telling me this to hurt me. She told me she believed I deserved the truth, even if it was ugly. And in that moment, something shifted inside me. A mixture of shock, rage, humiliation, and a strange, unexpected clarity. I wasn't going to cry, I wasn't going to run, I needed answers. And maybe, just maybe, I wasn't going to face this disaster alone. When I finally managed to steady my breathing, I asked her, almost in a whisper, to tell me everything from the beginning. She nodded, exhaling like she'd been holding that breath for days, and started scrolling through the message thread. Each screenshot she showed me felt like another punch straight to the chest. There were weeks' worth of messages. He wasn't just flirting. He was building a whole alternate reality with her. He told her he'd been unhappy for a long time, that I didn't understand his needs, that he felt trapped. The kind of things you only say when you want someone to feel sorry for you, or when you're preparing to move on before you've even ended what you already have. And all the while, he'd been coming home to me, hugging me from behind while I cooked, joking about weekend plans, acting like nothing in the world was wrong. She tapped the screen on one particular message, the one where he said he wished they could go back to how things were, and that he was single again, because the marriage was over in all the ways that mattered. My jaw clenched so hard I felt a headache shoot up the side of my face. I remember thinking how casually he threw away our vows with a few taps on a screen, like they were disposable, like I was disposable. And even then, some part of my brain tried to make excuses for him. Maybe he was drunk. Maybe he was overwhelmed. Maybe he didn't mean it. That loyal, hopeful part of me that still believed in the man I thought I married was desperately clinging to explanations that didn't make me feel like such a fool. She must have seen that conflict all over my face because she leaned in and told me she had no intention of hurting me. She said she didn't respond to most of his messages, that she kept her distance because she'd moved on and didn't want to sink into that chaos again. But when he started insisting, when he told her he was finally free, she realized something was off. She even said she thought about ignoring it altogether, but something in her conscience wouldn't let her. And hearing her say that, hearing the guilt mixed with honesty, made me feel something new. Gratitude. Not for the situation, God no, but for the fact that at least someone was willing to show me the truth he'd been hiding behind all those perfect husband smiles. I felt my throat tighten as she kept talking, not because of her words, but because of how familiar some of the lies sounded. He'd told her the same things he used to tell me about his ex before her. The same script, the same tragic hero act he always slipped into when he wanted sympathy. Hearing it laid out like that made my skin crawl. She told me he had this pattern, disappearing emotionally, then resurfacing with grand speeches about needing to find himself. And while she was describing it, I realized just how many red flags I'd painted white. All those nights he claimed he was exhausted, All the sudden mood swings, the way he got defensive when I asked harmless questions. It all snapped into place like pieces of a puzzle I should have solved years ago. At one point, she apologized again, telling me she wasn't trying to destroy my marriage. She kept her eyes down as she spoke, her voice trembling slightly. That vulnerability disarmed me in a way I didn't expect. There was no gloating, no hidden agenda, no competition between us. Just two women who'd been fed different portions of the same poison. And oddly enough, her honesty gave me the space to feel my anger freely. Not the kind of anger that makes you scream, but the deep, hollow kind that burns quietly through your chest, lighting up every moment you are made to feel small or paranoid or needy. I remember gripping the edge of the table and thinking, he knew exactly what he was doing. She went on to explain how he had tried to schedule a meetup, how he'd written that he felt alive again just talking to her, and how he wanted one last chance to see her in person. By then, my jaw was so tight I could barely move it. She said she couldn't stomach the idea of him lying to both of us, pretending he was some misunderstood victim while stringing us along. And that's when she said something that hit me like a blow to the sternum. He doesn't get to walk around hurting women for sport. Hearing that from her, someone who had every reason to avoid me, ignited something steady and fierce inside me. It was the first moment I felt a shift from shock to resolve, like the fog was lifting and leaving behind the sharper outline of what needed to happen next. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my composure as she scrolled through the final part of the conversation. And that's when she showed me the message he sent just the night before. One where he told her he'd been thinking about her nonstop, that he missed the way she made him feel, and that he couldn't stay in a dead marriage forever. Seeing that time-stamped proof, knowing he had kissed me goodnight not even an hour after sending it, made my entire body go cold. I felt something inside me quietly snap, not in a dramatic way, but in a painfully clear one. It was the moment I realized I wasn't grieving a marriage anymore. I was grieving who I believed he was. When I finally looked up at her again, she had her hands clasped in front of her, her expression soft but steady. She told me she understood if I hated her, but she wanted me to know she hadn't asked for any of this. She said she had only replied to him once, just once, and it was to tell him she wasn't interested, and that he needed to respect his marriage. And that, ironically, was the message that pushed her into contacting me. Because he responded by insisting he wasn't married anymore, saying that I knew the truth and they were basically done. I felt my nails dig into my own palms at that. It wasn't just betrayal, it was erasure. He had erased me, erased us, just to fish for attention from someone he threw away years ago. The more she talked, the more I realized she wasn't my threat. He was. She wasn't my enemy. He'd made both of us collateral damage. She leaned back, letting out this tired sigh, and told me she didn't expect anything from me. She didn't want drama. She didn't want revenge. She just wanted me to have what she wished someone had given her back then, the truth. But as I sat there, holding all that truth in my trembling hands, a different thought took shape in my mind, one that made my heartbeat slow down instead of speed up. I wasn't going to let him keep the upper hand. I wasn't going to let him walk away unscathed. And I could tell by the way she looked at me, really looked, that she felt that same quiet fire starting to burn. We sat there for a long moment, both of us staring at the phone between us like it was some venomous thing still capable of biting. I finally whispered, "I don't even know who I married," and the truth of those words tasted metallic on my tongue. She nodded slowly, her expression softening in a way that made something in my chest loosen. For the first time since sitting down, I didn't feel alone. It was strange, surreal, almost, to feel comforted by the very woman he once used as a cautionary tale. The woman he'd labeled hysterical, manipulative, unstable. Yet she was the one who offered me truth, not him. She was the one sitting across from me now, not running from honesty but embracing it. Meanwhile, he was somewhere, blissfully unaware that the little empire of lies he'd built was starting to crack. She gently pushed her phone aside and folded her hands, as if bracing for what came next. She told me she had been exactly where I was, shocked, humiliated, desperate to make sense of the nonsense. She said she recognized the way my shoulders curled in, the way I kept taking shallow breaths. "You're trying to hold yourself together," she said quietly, "but none of this is your fault." And hearing someone say that, someone who had seen the same patterns, the same manipulation, hit me harder than the messages themselves. I felt this tightness in my chest begin to unravel, like I was finally allowed to stop pretending everything was fine. She added that he had always been good at twisting narratives to make himself look like the victim, always good at turning the women in his life against each other so he could stay in control. I remember sitting back in my chair and rubbing my temples, trying to process the magnitude of everything he'd done. Not just the cheating, the rewriting of history, the gaslighting, the emotional baiting. I told her I felt stupid, and she immediately shook her head, insisting he was the one who thrived on confusion. She said something then that I'll never forget. "He counts on you feeling small. He counts on us blaming each other instead of seeing him for who he truly is." And just like that, something shifted between us. Something that felt like understanding, solidarity, maybe even the beginning of an alliance neither of us expected. I could feel it settling in my bones. This wasn't just about betrayal anymore. It was about reclaiming the power he always assumed he had over both of us. And in that moment, the idea of facing him alone suddenly seemed unnecessary. Because maybe, just maybe, we didn't have to. She leaned a little closer, lowering her voice, like we were conspiring even though neither of us had said the word revenge out loud yet. She started explaining how he operated when he wanted control, how he'd isolate, guilt trip, then come back with grand gestures that made you question whether you'd overreacted in the first place. Every example she gave echoed things I'd gone through. The silent treatments, the sudden bursts of tenderness, the way he'd make me feel childish for asking simple questions. I felt my stomach twist as I realized she wasn't describing her past with him. She was describing my present. And that recognition, that eerie overlap, made me feel both sickened and strangely validated. I wasn't imagining things. I hadn't been too sensitive. I'd been played by someone who'd rehearsed the same show before. She took a slow sip of her coffee, then set the cup down with a soft clink. "He thinks he's smarter than everyone," she murmured. "He thinks he can keep women in different corners of his life without them ever talking to each other." Hearing her say it, that plainly made a small spark ignite in my chest. Not anger, not yet, but a kind of dangerous clarity. She wasn't being vindictive. She was being honest. And it made me see how meticulously he'd built this little throne of manipulation, convinced he'd never be questioned, never exposed. I felt my spine straighten. A quiet steadiness settled over me, the kind that comes when the truth finally outweighs the fear. We began comparing dates, messages, moments, lining them up like evidence on a table. Every overlap was another crack in his carefully crafted lies. She told me he had contacted her just days after telling me he needed space to think clearly, as if clarity could be found in someone else's bed. I remembered the night he said that, how he'd touched my shoulder lightly, almost pityingly, and said he felt pulled in too many directions. Hearing it now made my skin crawl. She rubbed her thumb along the edge of her phone, saying, "He doesn't get to keep doing this to people. Not anymore." And something in me hardened at those words. Not in a cruel way, in a rightful way, a justified way. Because she was right. He didn't get to keep walking away clean. Not this time. We both sat back, almost mirroring each other, as if the weight of everything needed room to settle. The cafe felt warmer suddenly, the air thicker, like the universe itself was leaning in to hear what we would decide next. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small folder, something she said she kept just in case he ever tried to rewrite history again. Inside were screenshots, dates, even notes she'd made during their breakup years ago. Not out of obsession, but out of self-protection after he'd tried to paint her as unstable. My breath hitched when I saw how similar her experiences were to mine. The same excuses, the same disappearing acts, the same apologies worded so perfectly they almost made you feel grateful for his betrayal. It was like watching my own life through someone else's memories, and it was terrifying how perfectly they aligned. When she slid one of the pages across the table, her fingers trembled slightly. "You're not crazy," she said. "You're not dramatic. And you're definitely not imagining any of this." Hearing those words, spoken so deliberately, so gently, cracked something open in me. I felt tears burn behind my eyes, not from sadness, but from sheer relief. Because someone else had lived the same chaos, survived it, and was now sitting in front of me looking stronger than the stories he'd told about her. It made me realize how much of myself I'd lost trying to prove I was the opposite of everything he accused her of being. She wasn't broken. She wasn't bitter. She was simply someone who'd figured him out too late, and now she was making sure I didn't carry that burden alone. We both grew quiet after that, the kind of quiet that feels like a turning point. I stared at the mess of evidence between us, the lies, the timelines, the emotional breadcrumbs he'd left behind, and I felt something shift deep inside me. A resolve, a decision forming slowly but unmistakably. She looked at me with a knowing expression, almost like she could feel the change happening too. "We don't have to let him get away with this," she whispered. And for the first time since the shock began, I felt steady, solid, like the ground wasn't collapsing anymore. It was rearranging itself beneath my feet. I nodded, a small but certain gesture, and she nodded back. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, intentional. The beginning of something he would never see coming. We left the cafe together, walking side by side in a silence that wasn't uncomfortable, just heavy with everything we now knew. The late afternoon air felt colder than before, sharp against my cheeks, but it somehow cleared my mind. She stopped near her car, turned to me, and asked gently, "What do you want to do?" And it was the first time anyone had asked me that since my world cracked open. Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "How could he?" Not, "What did he say?" But, "What do you want to do?" The question settled deep inside my chest, and I swear it felt like my spine straightened a little. For once, I wasn't reacting to what he did. I was choosing how I would respond. And in that small but powerful shift, I felt the first spark of control returning to me. We spent the next hour sitting inside her car, seats reclined back slightly, going through everything with the precision of two women who'd finally stopped blaming themselves. The windows fogged up from our breaths, the car smelling faintly of vanilla air freshener and the warmth of our shared adrenaline. She suggested we confront him together, not in some screaming match, but strategically, calmly, with all the evidence laid in front of him. She said men like him crumble more under quiet truth than loud chaos. And as she spoke, I realized she wasn't driven by vengeance for herself anymore. She was driven by the need to break the cycle, by the desire to make sure he never again had the power to twist someone's reality until they couldn't recognize themselves. That intention, that clarity, made me trust her even more. I found myself nodding slowly, feeling the idea settle into place. But then, another thought surfaced, one that surprised even me. I wanted him to feel cornered. Not attacked physically, not screamed at, but intellectually, emotionally, morally. I wanted him to see two women he had underestimated stand side by side in absolute clarity. I wanted him to realize he wasn't untouchable. She looked at me with this sharp, perceptive expression, like she could sense my thoughts forming. "He'd never expect us to work together," she said, and she was right. He'd spent years ensuring women never compared notes, never talked, never collaborated. That alone made the decision feel almost poetic. We didn't have every detail figured out yet, but we knew one thing with absolute certainty. The trap we were about to set would be the last time he ever underestimated either of us. We agreed that the confrontation needed to happen somewhere he felt comfortable, somewhere he wouldn't suspect a thing. That way, his guard would be down, his lies unprepared, his mask fully on, until the moment it shattered. After a long moment of thinking, I suggested our house, my house, the place he believed was his safe territory, his kingdom, his stage. The irony felt almost delicious. She raised an eyebrow and then slowly smiled, that knowing, satisfied kind of smile that only another woman who's been through hell can offer. "He'll never see it coming," she murmured, and she was right. He'd expect tears, maybe accusations, but not a strategic ambush built with quiet truth and undeniable proof. That night, I played the role he expected from me, the one he thought I'd always cling to. I cooked dinner, hummed softly, set the table, all with hands that trembled just slightly, but not enough for him to notice. I even greeted him with a small smile when he walked through the door, his voice booming like he owned the air inside the house. He kissed my cheek casually, like a man who believed he had me wrapped so tightly around his fingers that escape wasn't even a possibility. And while he talked about his day, I watched him closely, the way he loosened his tie, the way he kicked off his shoes, the way he laughed at his own jokes. It was surreal. I was seeing him from the outside for the first time, not as my husband, but as the man who had so easily betrayed me. When I excused myself to grab something from the laundry room, my hands were cold with adrenaline. I texted her the signal. "He's here. Come in 5. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat. I stood there, leaning against the washer, listening to the muffled sounds of him moving around the kitchen like everything was perfectly normal. Then came the knock. One short, decisive knock that sliced through the house like a blade. I walked back calmly, deliberately, my face neutral. "Can you get that?" I asked. He looked confused. We weren't expecting anyone, but he went anyway. I watched from the hallway as he opened the door, and froze. The kind of freeze you only see when someone's soul recognizes the consequences arriving. The moment he saw her standing there, every ounce of color drained from his face. He didn't speak at first. His mouth opened slightly, then closed, as if his brain was scrambling for the version of reality he wanted to project. She stood tall, calm, almost eerily composed, holding her phone loosely in one hand. I walked up behind him slowly, my footsteps soft against the floor, and when he turned to look at me, I saw it. The panic flickering in his eyes. Not guilt, not remorse. Fear. Real fear. Because in that split second, he understood he wasn't controlling the narrative anymore. He wasn't picking which woman got the truth and which one got the illusion. He was standing between the two lives he thought he could manage, and both were staring back at him with absolute clarity. He stammered something like, "This isn't what it looks like." But because we were speaking in indirect speech now, in the tone he always used to manipulate, it didn't come out clean. It came out defensive, sloppy. He said he had no idea why she was there. He accused her of showing up uninvited. He claimed she was trying to start problems again. The same script he'd used to turn us against each other before. Only this time, we were watching him read lines from a play we already knew by heart. She lifted her phone slightly, not aggressively, just enough for him to understand that his own words were about to speak louder than his excuses. And I swear, I saw his throat bob as he swallowed hard, realizing everything he'd built was seconds away from collapse. He reached for my arm then, gently, like he always did when he wanted to steer my emotions. He said I was misunderstanding things, that she was fixated, that she twisted conversations, the same tired excuses he thought would work forever. But his voice cracked, his confidence faltered, his hand trembled against my skin. I stepped back, just a small move, but it felt like an earthquake between us. She crossed her arms and said, softly but firmly, that he had told her he was single. And then it happened, the exact moment he realized the trap had closed. His shoulders slumped, his eyes darted around desperately, his mouth opening and closing like he couldn't find a single version of the truth that wouldn't bury him. It was the first time I'd ever seen him at a loss for words, and in the quiet that followed, he finally understood. Every lie he'd ever told had walked through the door at the same time, and none of them belonged to him anymore. He stood there, trapped between us, looking smaller than I had ever seen him. His shoulders weren't broad anymore. They were hunched, tight, like he was trying to fold himself into a version of the man he pretended to be. I watched him inhale sharply, then exhale through his teeth, the way he did when he was preparing to lie. He said we were ganging up on him. He said we were misinterpreting simple conversations. He even tried to say he had only reached out to her because he was concerned about her well-being. Listening to him twist the truth into shapes that didn't fit anymore would have broken me weeks earlier. But now, standing beside the woman he tried to pit against me, his words just fell flat. They held no weight, no power. It was like watching a magician stumble through a trick after the audience already saw the strings. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't stoop to his level. She just told him, calmly, that she had screenshots. All of them. The timestamps, the conversations, the invitations he pretended he never sent. And the way he reacted. I'll never forget it. He flinched. Actually flinched. Like the truth itself had slapped him across the face. He begged her not to show anything to the wrong people, said it would ruin his reputation. That was the moment something clicked so sharply inside me that I could practically hear it. He wasn't sorry. He wasn't ashamed. He was terrified of exposure, terrified of losing the image he'd spent years crafting. Then he turned to me, eyes wide, voice shaking in a way I'd never heard before. He said I was overreacting, that I shouldn't throw away our life together. He asked why I was choosing her side, like honesty was a side to pick. And the irony nearly made me laugh, because every time I'd asked for honesty, he'd made me feel like I was asking for too much. Now he was begging for mercy from the same transparency he'd spent so long avoiding. And for the first time in our marriage, I didn't feel afraid of disappointing him. I didn't feel guilty for standing my ground. I felt powerful, solid. Like my voice mattered more than the illusion of who he wanted me to be. He kept talking, rambling really, words spilling out in disorganized panic, the kind of panic men like him feel only when they lose control. He said he'd been confused, that he'd been going through a rough patch, that he didn't mean any of it. He even threw in that tired line about how men sometimes say stupid things when they feel neglected. And hearing him claim neglect after all the mental gymnastics I'd done to keep our marriage afloat made something dark and steady settle inside me. I didn't yell, I didn't cry, I didn't collapse. I just stood there, letting him expose himself with every clumsy justification. She watched him too, arms crossed, her expression almost bored, because she had already seen this performance in her own past with him. Once you've witnessed the pattern, it stops being heartbreaking and becomes predictable. He turned to her then, desperation leaking through his voice. He said she had misunderstood his intentions, that he never meant to lead her on, that he was only trying to check on an old friend. She actually laughed, a short, sharp sound that sliced the air. "You told me you were single," she reminded him calmly. His face twisted, searching for an explanation that didn't exist. He denied it at first, then backtracked, then claimed he didn't remember phrasing it that way. Every lie tangled with the next, until even he seemed unsure which version he was supposed to defend. It was almost pathetic watching him drown in his own contradictions. I took a step closer, my voice steady when I finally spoke. I told him I had trusted him, that I had defended him, that I had silenced my own instincts every time something felt off. And while I spoke, he kept whispering that I was making a mistake, that I was throwing away something real. He insisted he loved me. He insisted he was just lost. He insisted I was overreacting. But none of those words reached me. They floated in the air like smoke from a fire that had already burned itself out. And when he realized nothing he said was landing, when he realized I wasn't breaking, he panicked even more. He begged me not to tell anyone. He said his family would never look at him the same. He said it would kill him if his reputation fell apart. And that was when I looked him straight in the eyes and realized the truth. He didn't fear losing me. He feared losing the version of himself he performed for everyone else. I felt something inside me settle, a calm, deliberate certainty that surprised even me. I looked at him and told him, in the same detached tone he once used to dismiss my feelings, that his reputation was the least of my concerns now. That he had built a life on half-truths and borrowed integrity, and if it all crumbled because he couldn't keep his lies straight, that was his burden to carry. He dropped to sit on the edge of the armchair, elbows on his knees, hands tangled in his hair. He said I was being cruel, that I was choosing the worst possible interpretation of his actions. Hearing that, after weeks, months, maybe years of being blindfolded, made a sharp, almost bitter laugh rise in my chest. Cruel? He had no idea what cruelty even looked like. If I wanted to be cruel, this scene would have looked very different. Instead, I was simply done protecting a man who treated honesty like an optional accessory. She stepped closer then, standing beside me, not dominating the moment, not overshadowing me, but supporting me with that quiet, powerful solidarity only another woman who's lived the same nightmare can offer. She told him he needed to stop pretending, that he needed to face what he'd done, and he begged, actually begged, for us to handle this privately, said he couldn't bear the thought of his parents knowing, his coworkers knowing, anyone knowing, that he'd lose everything, that he didn't deserve to be dragged through the mud. And something shifted in my chest, not out of pity, but out of clarity, because he wasn't afraid of the truth. He was afraid of losing the mask he'd always worn. I told him, calmly and without raising my voice, that I would no longer lie for him, that I would no longer curate the version of him he wanted the world to see. He reached for my hand, but I stepped back, and the distance between us felt symbolic, like the physical manifestation of every time he'd emotionally distanced himself while expecting me to close the gap. His voice cracked as he asked me not to ruin his life. But the truth was, I wasn't ruining anything. I was simply returning what already belonged to him. She and I exchanged one quiet glance, a shared understanding, a shared strength. And in that moment, I realized just how powerful honesty becomes when women stand side by side instead of being pitted against each other. And as I watched him crumble beneath the weight of his own choices, I felt the first real breath of freedom fill my lungs.